So, with recent news of the X-Men finally being bought by Marvel and Disney, it really does excite me because I'm actually thinking that, looking back at it, the X-Men movies weren't really that good. They weren't. X1, X2, X3 was horrible, First Class, Wolverine Origin, Days of Future Past, but looking at it as a whole, the X-Men in the Fox universe has always struggled to find a footing in the superhero genre, and that's because of the fact that Fox doesn't really necessarily understand how to write their characters. See, writing for the X-Men is not as simple as some people might think. Some people might think that writing for the X-Men is just like, oh, these people, they have magical power that just give them from their DNA and they just fight villains. And it's like, yeah, that's true. That's any superhero team. But what makes them different from other superheroes teams? Like, for example, the Avengers, they're all friends and stuff, but at the end of the day, they have their own duties and their own jobs and their own lives, different from that of the Fantastic Four, who are a particular family dynamic, which many fans enjoy. Is that you have Reed Richards, who's like a father, you have Susan and Johnny, who are mother and son, and then you have like Ben Grimm, who's more of the emotional baggage of the group. Sorry to say that, but it's the truth. And they are also struggling to find a footing in the whole superhero landscape, and that's because of the fact that Fox, they don't know how to correctly implement these sort of aspects into their movies. Instead, they go for the generic superhero telling because it's very easy. You can throw it in there. You don't have to think too hard. It's not too much writing. And I'm not saying that they're idiots, but I'm saying that it's just easy to do it that way, and that's the problem. See, when it comes to Marvel at this moment, Marvel is taking more chances, as you can tell. Marvel's taking more chances in giving us interesting stories and more cosmic, thought-provoking movies. Look at Infinity War. Infinity War was still considered the best superhero movie because the fact that the ending added so much weight and impact to events that were happening that it really felt like it was an ending chapter to the things that we saw built up. Now, compare that to Days of Future Past, which in my sense, it was trying to be a soft reboot of the original X-Men universe, because when they did First Class was kind of like the beginning of the timeline, but things didn't line up and add up properly, and that's probably one of the reasons why the X-Men get shitted on constantly when it comes to their live action movies with the coherentness of their timeline. Now Marvel has access to these characters. I think that there should be a way to implement these characters so they can feel real. I feel like they have an impact on the entire universe rather than just shoehorn them in there. I'm gonna explain to you guys, in my thoughts, the easiest way to implement the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before I get into that, remember to like and subscribe and share this video with anyone you know and love. Now let's get down to business. So when implementing the idea of the X-Men being part of the MCU, you have to develop it in a way where you have to get the audience to believe that the mutants have just came about, like they just popped out of nowhere. And the one thing a lot of people don't understand about what makes the X-Men so interesting is because they have a large impact on the world around them. See, unlike other superheroes like the Avengers, Fantastic Four, whoever you want to consider, hell, even going to DC with Justice League, those powers are either coming from inside them or they're coming from an outside source. Spider-Man was built by a radioactive spider. Captain America got the superhero serum. Iron Man builds his suits. Everyone's powers come from an outside source. What makes mutants different from everyone else? See, mutants they don't get to choose to have powers, and even if they get powers, they don't know how to handle them the best ways possible. They're more sporadic. So mutants usually get their powers around the age of 13 to 14 years old. That can have some really dangerous actions to go around the world. For example, you can have 1 minute your son hits 15, the next day he's shooting lasers out of his eyes. The way to handle that is makes people afraid because they don't understand how to handle this properly, and that's what should be part of the MCU, as mutants just start springing out of nowhere. Now, it's the easy way of doing this, and I'm gonna explain to it, and it lines up with whatever Marvel was doing. So the first thing you do is, at the end of Avengers 4, have the Avengers destroy the Infinity Stones. Some of you might say, oh, that makes no sense. Scarlet Witch destroyed the Mind Stone in Infinity War. It is possible for enough power with something similar from that can definitely destroy the Infinity Stones. So if they go about in a way where the Avengers somehow find enough power, let's say they use the Quantum Realm, energy from the Quantum Realm, and mixed it with Captain Marvel's energy, unless her energy is quantum as well, and using that energy, they can destroy the Infinity Stones. Now, this is an interesting aspect I'm bringing into it. So you know how Hydra used the Infinity Stone to give the abilities to Wanda and Pierre Maximoff, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch? They got their powers from the energy in the Mind Stone. Now for the MCU, I think we should implement the idea that the Infinity Stones can actually give individuals powers by going into their genetic code and unlocking their X gene. Now this is very interesting because it sums up why Quicksilver has powers and why Scarlet Witch has powers, and it makes a lot of sense. This will lead into something I like to call a reverse M-Day. Now some people are wondering what a reverse M-Day is. So back in the Marvel comic books, there was an event called House of M where Scarlet Witch went crazy and she dimension warped the entire Earth or universe, where mutants were more of the dominant people and humans and other superheroes who weren't mutants were more subservient. But like at the end, she eventually said no more mutant. It wiped out a large portion of the mutant population. So that's a very interesting way you can implement that. So let's say this. Last 20 minutes of Avengers 4. They're fighting Thanos. They all team up. Everyone's there. They even got people from who were been snapped. They're back and they're all attacking Thanos. They're beating Thanos up. And then they get the gauntlet off of him. Gauntlet comes off. Tony Stark uses it, or Captain America uses it, whoever uses it, and uses the power to either A, destroy itself, which I think in the comic books they can't really do, but in MCU I think that could be rearranged, obviously, because MCU is its own entire universe, and each gem kind of has their own little rules in their entire universe. You can say with enough energy of the gems, you can just have them destroy themselves, or actually use powers from the quantum realm to destroy the gems in the gauntlet. They eventually defeat Thanos, possibly killing him. Most likely, I think killing him, unless Marvel wants to use him for other movies. Who knows? But killing him, then what happens is that the explosion ripples throughout the galaxy. Like ripples through the entire universe. Like it's so massive, it goes through the entire universe, and now you notice there's nothing wrong until later on where you go back to Earth and there's people with superpowers now. Now this, what happened was the gems actually activated the genetic code, the X gene that's inside of some humans. Now this is very interesting. So like now the Avengers have a new problem. They destroyed the Infinity Stones, they defeated Thanos, but now they have this problem with all these people with like extreme powerful abilities that can even rival their own. So that can lead to more villains and other people who can be very dangerous. So like, what can that lead to? Now, this is the perfect way to introduce Professor X, because how about this? So at the end, let's say Captain America does die, because I believe he does die. Say Captain America dies fighting Thanos. After that happens, Iron Man becomes director of S.H.I.E.L.D. just like in the comic books. He becomes director of S.H.I.E.L.D. He focuses on more doing that, and he finds out that S.H.I.E.L.D. had some really secret files that he didn't know about. So looking into these files, he find out that there are other people out there with extraordinary abilities that are not from outside sources and that comes from within. So like, who are these people and why does S.H.I.E.L.D. have information on them? Why does S.H.I.E.L.D. have all these like weird stories? And this has happened in another story where they introduced Blue Marvel. I think they should implement that in the same way with Professor X. So like Tony, let's say a post-credit scene, Tony gets these letters and reads them and reads the information. He reads a report on the guy who becomes Magneto, Eric. He reads a report on him and he's like, his whereabouts are unknown somewhere in East Europe, and that sets up for Magneto whenever Magneto wants to come out of the hiding. And then like he reads a report on Mystique. Mystique is God knows where, she's popped up here and there. And the original Mystique is actually very old, guys. For those who don't know that, Mystique is actually very freaking old, like pushing around almost 100, 200 years old. You can implement that saying like, well, she pops up every now and then. She, like, we can seem to catch her every now and then. She disguises herself as someone else. So, and it's not the Jennifer Lawrence. I'm talking about like, this is evil Mystique from like the original movies and stuff. That would be dope to have. And then the next report is Logan or James Howlett. So let's go with his original name, James Howlett, Wolverine. And this is where we find out that Weapon X did happen. The mutants who did Weapon X are mainly dead. Like most of them are dead or in hiding. And one they had under mind control after giving him an adamantium build. Now, here's the thing, they can get into the idea of what is adamantium. Adamantium can be like a weird mix of vibranium with some other metals. Like, so they can say that, so going back to Wolverine, they can actually state that, oh, he broke free of his control and he ran away in the Canadian wilderness. We haven't seen him since the 70s. And this will really shock Tony. Like, Tony will be like, what the fuck? What is these? Wait, mutants? We have mutants? What the hell is this? Mutants? Like people with these weird abilities and stuff. So Tony, obviously, he's thinking of the really bad implications of some of these people may being like a threat to humanity. So he actually decides to, you know, go check out this one. As one report actually has a guy and they actually have his whereabouts very available. So one of these reports actually has Charles Xavier on it. Now, the powers they say is very unknown, but it seems to be somewhat of a mind reader, a little bit of that, not too much known about the extent of that ability. And Tony can actually, get in his car and go visit Professor X. And Professor X could just be a very, solidary man who lives in upstate New York, who has a nice little mansion, Xavier Estate, and he has studied the X gene and mutations, and he can kind of give Tony the rundown of what it is. So when Tony goes to meet him, Tony's like, okay, number one, who are you? Can you read my mind? What are these things happening? And Professor X can actually explain that to Tony that he has it under control. Now, what does this mean is that Tony and the Avengers don't have to worry too much about the mutant thing that's happening, the mutant crisis, but now Professor X has it under control, and Professor X is going to be offering help to those who need to control these abilities. So this is a very interesting way to implement the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, here's the thing. For those who ask, no, the X-Men are not created. They're not there yet. Xavier's mansion's pretty small. It's just him and probably a couple maids here and there. But he's a geneticist. He wrote books on genetic mutation and all that stuff. He's pretty smart, and he's pretty smart in that field. So Tony would obviously leave it to him, but also keep an eye out because he does not know too much about this guy. So now you have the idea of we know what mutants came from. Mutants have been around for a while, but they're very small and they're very small population. So you can easily just group them in with the regular superheroes. Oh, she can switch her body. Well, we have a freaking technology that can do that. We can say she has the technology, or she can be an alien, or blah blah blah. Whatever. They can kind of just throw them in with anything in the MCU and just not call them mutants. So what does that lead to now? Now we have to explain how the mutants get there, because how the X gene got there, was it built, where did it come from? So that's easy. Marvel's already making the film for that idea, and I hope they see this video. I don't know if anyone wants to watch this. Get that video to someone at Marvel real quick, and they can come up with this idea. Number one, you use the Eternals film. The Eternals film is actually a great idea to end the whole entire MCU, to introduce the X gene. So for those who don't know, the Eternals are these really cosmic beings, really powerful cosmic beings who once lived on Earth thousands of years ago. And thousands of years ago, before even mankind had any power on Earth as they do now. Back then, the Celestials, these powerful cosmic beings, actually created and examined on different races, which making them what they are today. They examine on the Creed, they examine on the Scrolls, you name it. Anyway. So when it came to Earth, they created the Eternals. The Eternals are these godlike beings. Think of Zeus, Hera, Athena. Think of Greek god level beauty and wisdom. These big beings who live on mountains and flew around. They're powerful. These are the Eternals. Those are the Eternals, right? And what led into later on is there's also some fucked up versions of the experimentation that they went through, which is called the Deviants. Now these are the trolls, the ugly, monsterish people, and then you have some people who just didn't change at all. They just were regular human beings. So what ended up happening is the Celestials end up leaving the Earth and coming back later, but in that time being, civilizations are built, and the Deviants kind of just wreak havoc and torture the humans who are defenseless to fight off, and the Eternals kind of stay to themselves. So I think the film should be based around somewhat of the humans rising up against the Deviants, as well as with the help of the Eternals, to see if the Eternals actually make the effort to become a team and fight off these Deviants. Now, I don't know too much about the Eternals other than that, but when you're looking deeper into it now, what if we go on about in a way where at the end there has to be this big cosmologic event? No matter what happens at the end, the Celestials will come back and they'll see what happened. They will not like the idea of all these people dying and the Deviants controlling, and the Deviants obviously will try to fight back because they don't know who the Celestials is. The Celestials pretty much came back hundreds of thousands of years later, and they don't know too much about these beings. They see these really powerful beings coming in, destroying, just ready to just wreak havoc and destroy. And what happens is most of the Deviants get swept up, they get killed, they get wrecked. The Eternals, they see what's going on, and the lasting Eternals that are there, they get up and they fly off somewhere. They don't come back. We don't see them ever again until Eternals 2. What happens is All you would need is a post-credit scene. Now, in the post-credit scene, all that you need to show is a woman comes out the rubble of this big event. The whole world's kind of like destroyed. And what happens is you see her come out of the rubble. She's walking out and it has a crossfade of her into modern day time. Now, this is the interesting thing. You do not tell the audience who this woman is. You leave for the YouTubers like me, Comic Historian, Comic Explain, to explain who this woman is. And this woman would be Celine from the Hellfire Club, and she is extremely old. Like, I think she's somewhat older than Apocalypse. So like, looking at it, Celine would actually be like an obvious indication that, okay, mutants do exist, and due to experimentation on humans by the Celestial, what happened is that the humans that didn't seem like they had anything wrong with them actually did. They actually had the X gene. So the X gene has been dormant in humanity for like generations and thousands, pretty much our entire time on Earth. Now that's an interesting way to explain to the audience how the X gene has came about. And now, what will you do now with the mutants? So I suspect this for phase 4, phase 5, whenever they want us to implement in the mutants. I personally think what they should do is, for example, Spider-Man Homecoming or whatever Spider-Man movie they're gonna do next, have one of his friends come out to be a mutant and actually have these weird powers. Or you can do it in a way where in some films, some people who didn't have powers now have powers, or just like make it feel like it matters, or have it in a Netflix series, even though the Netflix series like to do their own thing, happen to have some characters who have mutation abilities or mutant abilities, like such as in Jessica Jones. You can do some research and find out that humans are coming out with these weird abilities like super strength, and she's not the only one. Just make it feel like the world is changing because of the events of Avengers 4, and then the uprising of mutants, which then leads into the X-Men movie, which eventually will happen. Now, some of you may be asking like how the X-Men movie would start off. Very simple. Due to the rise of mutants, people such as Charles Xavier and Magneto will be creating both sides. Humans hate mutants because obviously they can't control them. They don't know what these people are. These people are flying around attacking, and they already hate the Avengers. Not everyone hates the Avengers. Like a good portion of the world still loves the Avengers, but there is some level of like fear and hatred from others in power who think the Avengers are dangerous. So now you have these people who now see more superpower beings just like the Avengers running around. This will send shockwaves throughout the MCU. So now you have more prejudice, you have more movies about the prejudice against mutants, all that stuff. This will leak into the X-Men movies. Now what would happen is Charles Xavier would then form a team, kind of inspired from the Avengers, to show that mutants can also be very helpful just like the Avengers and everything, so people can start fearing them. On top of that, you see mutants also like robbing banks and using their abilities in any different way as possible to kind of manipulate and change people's perspective, and then those mutants get picked up and become part of the Brotherhood, who is like Magneto's like rising up, gathering up all the mutants he can, and pretty much saying, fuck humanity, I'm going to race and we're gonna fight off. And pretty much like the first X-Men movie, what you do, very simple, take the X-Men they currently are now and you build around them. Here's the thing, there'll be no Wolverine, there'll be no Storm, and there'll be no heavy hitters. The only people that'll be on the team is Angel, Beast, Iceman, who will be Ice Boy, Cyclops as leader, and Jean Grey. Now that all makes perfect sense to create and do, because number one, it just makes it more enjoyable to watch, as well as the fact that seeing them build the original team up will actually impress the comic book fans and actually get viewers to get used to seeing these new implications of the characters. So starting off with these original 5, then leading into adding more members over time will actually make fans start liking the X-Men even more, because the X-Men are more of a family rather than just a random group of superheroes who just decided to save the world. So guys, that's how I'll implement the X-Men. I know it's kind of all over the place, but let's go over again of how I think Marvel can implement them the best way. Step 1, you destroy the Infinity Stones, and the power of the Infinity Stones echo throughout the entire universe, unlocking the X gene in people's abilities. Step 2, you explain that there's some mutants out there who are already currently active, and they have been for a good while, showing that the mutants have been around for a very long time, just there weren't so many, there were very few in between, so you couldn't really group them as a whole force of mutants. Step 3, you then explain the origin of the X gene through the Eternals film, which will give fans an understanding of where mutants come from. Step 4, you then have the whole mutant situation echo throughout the entire universe, go through your Netflix series, your television shows, even your movies have mutants pop up here and there. At the end, step 5, you have to introduce the X-Men and the Brotherhood as 2 fighting forces for the rights of mutants and the protection of humanity. And there you go, that's how you implement the X-Men into the MCU the proper way. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Megasonic. If you like this video and want to see more, feel free to like and subscribe. We do all types of things like this on the channel. But anyway, I see you guys later. Megasonic out.